Well, I think there are two types of religious rhetoric that presidents are using, and that's something I distinguish between in the book. There are these common religious references that are almost expected in their way of bringing people together, particularly in moments of national trial and things like that. And it's natural for presidents to continue to use religion that way. As far as using it for accomplishing their goals, the fact that it's not persuasive is not really that uncommon today in terms of what we know about presidential speech. So there's an expanding body of literature that's showing that whatever type of argument presidents use, it typically is going to fail, and that includes really gifted communicators like Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and so forth. I think religious rhetoric had the potential to be different because of the power that these beliefs have to individuals, so it was worth looking at as a special case. But the fact that it's not working is actually potentially unsurprising given what we know about other types of rhetoric. So I think presidents continue to do it because they're ignoring this strong evidence that their words are not persuasive in any context, and it comes from, to some extent, I believe, the fact that presidents attribute their victories in elections to their ability to persuade people to vote for them, that they gave great speeches, that they performed well in debates, and that their words were what carried them to victory. So it's natural to think then that once they get in office, even if public opinion is not on their side, they could come up with a compelling argument and change people's minds. Religion seems to be a lot in terms of what they get from their advisors and other people surrounding their administration, an appealing argument, but that doesn't mean it's any more effective than any other type of argument. Yeah, I think there are certainly certain dimensions of the presidency that are tied to religion one way or the other, that the president's called upon to be a religious leader of sorts in a civil religion type of way. But that, I think, is something separate as well from making a religious argument for policy, which can be very alienating to people, where they don't like the fact that the president seems to be trying to exploit religion to perhaps use it for partisan purposes that are distorting the meanings of these teachings and that people can find very offensive. Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I found in the book is that presidents use religious rhetoric less than we probably think. That we would expect them to use it frequently, particularly if it's a religious president like Jimmy Carter, but they shy away from that. And so one of the things I try to argue is that the president only turns to religious rhetoric in typically a crisis-type scenario. So Carter's a good case in point, where Carter's someone who taught Sunday school 14 times as president. He's someone who is very comfortable with his own personal religious identity, but at the same time he was uncomfortable using religion publicly, that he felt it was a violation of his views on separation of church and state. And of course that goes back to his experience in Georgia, where he would support things like overturning the state's blue laws and so forth. And so you don't really see a fluctuation in Carter's use of religious rhetoric. You only see him use this at this one moment of peril for his administration when he was struggling to pass his energy policy. You have long gas lines, you have international problems, you have his opinion ratings falling down to 32% in that range, and that kind of led him to seek a different means of persuading people. So I think you don't see as much religious rhetoric as you might expect, and the fluctuations are not necessarily there either. They're only using these arguments in very specific types of situations. I think people will be particularly interested in the book if they have an interest in presidential leadership. One of the fundamental questions that political scientists try to ask about the president is how they are able to exercise influence. The president doesn't receive much constitutional authority, so the president is faced with this day-to-day challenge of finding the authority to act, of transitioning into actual power. It's a good study of presidential power because people do think that the president's use of the bully pulpit is particularly important. They think that when the president uses religious arguments, they're influential. That's why Bush was controversial, I believe. That's why his language was controversial, because people felt that he was able to somehow persuade people to support things that they wouldn't otherwise support. And so learning that that's not the case, I think, is valuable for our understanding of presidential power. If religious arguments aren't persuasive, then what arguments will be persuasive? So it's interesting to people with an interest in presidential power. I think it's interesting to people who are trying to learn more about these specific moments in history. So I think you gain an appreciation for the choices that, say, Clinton made when he was facing impeachment, when you learn about the context of those choices and you see that the psalm he chooses to cite is a psalm that actually refers to David in the Bible committing adultery, and that there's there's things to be learned in that sense that are just intrinsically interesting. And then I think anybody who's interested in the role of religion in American democracy will find this book powerful, because there are normative questions to be asked, whether or not these are appropriate arguments in a public square. And ultimately, I would say that they are, that even if they don't have a strategic purpose, presidents talking about religious values can be defended on other grounds. But others are going to have different views on that, and I think this book raises those questions too.